during COVID, he went back into a depression,
Yeah.
but he hasn't, trashed the house or anything. Like, I'm not afraid of him anymore. I used to be literally afraid of what he was going to do to me, and I don't feel that way at all anymore. Now he gives me hugs.
Hi, welcome back to Let Me Ask You Something, the weekly podcast where I, MD Pittman, talk to everyday ordinary people about something extraordinary in their lives. Now, this week I talked with Gina Heumann. Now, she's an author, a speaker. She has launched, as of today, July 26, 2001, Trauma Drama University, and that's based on her experience with something that I never heard of until I talked with Gina. Reactive Attachment Disorder. Now, we get into that, what that disorder is and how it impacted her, and have her start Trauma Drama University. And we get into other issues and topics with this conversation. So, without much further ado, here's my conversation with Gina Heumann.
All right, we are live. Welcome back to, I think we're episode 18 of the Let Me Ask You Something podcast. Today we have Gina Heumann. Did I pronounce it right?
That's correct.
All right, great. I suck at pronunciations. Gina is, she is an adoptive mother. She has adopted 2 kids from Guatemala, and one of them had what's called reactive attachment disorder. So why is this an issue? I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me ask you something, Gina. Why is this a serious issue? What happens with this reactive attachment disorder?
Oh my goodness. Well, reactive attachment disorder is a mental illness caused by abuse and neglect in the first years of life. And the earlier it is in a child's life, the more severe it could be. And not every kid gets it if they have these circumstances, but some do. And it causes severe anxiety, anger, violence. Think about the people that trash hotel rooms. That was my son. Anytime I said the word no, he would get so angry that it would turn into this huge, over-the-top meltdown, sometimes lasting like 4 hours. And got scarier as he got older because he got physically stronger, and I couldn't keep him from hurting me as he got older.
So how long does this last? How long did this last? I think you told me that your son's 17 now, and he's beyond that, past that. But how long did this go on?
Well, he's beyond some of it. We're still healing his brain. But so the brain is really malleable. It's called neuroplasticity, when you can actually fix the brain or rewire things that are going on. What happens is if there's this abuse and neglect at the beginning of life, it causes the first part of your brain to develop is that fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. So when a baby starts crying, a caregiver is supposed to come and help them and soothe them and figure out what they need. But in those first few months of life, if that's not happening, that baby is going into fight or flight mode all the time, and the rest of the brain isn't developing at a normal rate. And it can be a lifelong thing unless we can get that brain to rewire. And it takes a whole different style of parenting. It takes, professional help. Yeah. And it's not something that you can just love out of him. Yeah. We kind of naively thought as adoptive parents, well, if we just love him, it's going to be enough. Yeah. And it's not.
So when you adopt, are these 2 boys related or they were not related when you adopted them?
No, and actually they had very different circumstances. My older son's birth mother was an older, not teenager. She was a little bit older. She was a regular childbearing age. She had 6 children. She just couldn't afford any more. And so she placed him for adoption. We know that she took really good care of him. We actually met her when we went down to pick him up. And, you know, we also found out she worked for a restaurant, so she got paid in money and food. And in Guatemala, there's a real bad malnourishment problem. And
Yeah.
so we're like, okay, well, if she's getting paid in food from a restaurant, she's probably pretty healthy and gets some protein. And so my first son, he was easy. He also then went into a foster care situation when she decided to place him for adoption. And he was the first foster care baby. So they had 4 kids. They were like 12, I don't know, 16, 12, 8, and 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he was like about the time they would have another kid. So they decided to be foster parents. And he was their first foster baby. So they all just fell in love with him and cuddled him and touched him and held him and did all the things that you're supposed to do with a baby.
Yeah.
My second son, we know that his birth mother was very young and already had a child. I think she had her first child when she was 14. Very sad situation. And that child supposedly had Down syndrome or some kind of of special needs that she couldn't take another child. And so when she got pregnant with him, we don't know. She's from a very remote part of Guatemala where there's probably poor nutrition. So we're thinking that affected his brain development also. But then he went into foster care and we think he was neglected. I didn't find out the signs of neglect until he was much older. But looking back on it, they were all there. We just didn't know what we were dealing with. We thought.
Getting into the adoption, did you know that he had this background? I mean, what was nothing was disclosed?
No, we didn't know anything except, I mean, the doctor looked at him and said, yes, he's growing and he's healthy and whatever, but that was about it. And it's really early to diagnose that, but they should have noticed that he was neglected, I would think.
Yeah. So when you find this out, what was your, when you find out that some of these issues are starting to arise, what was your reaction? I guess, what did you do?
We first started noticing symptoms right when we got him. He was just a cranky baby all the time. He was always, we couldn't get him to sleep unless the planets aligned. It was kind of a crazy situation. He was angry about everything. And I'll even tell you at 2.5, there was a day when I drove my mom to the airport, and I'm about 45 minutes from the airport. And at one point on the way there, he heard a song on the radio and he wanted to hear it again. And he said, Mama, play it again. And I said, well, I can't, buddy, because the people on the radio station decide what songs we're going to play. And he just escalated like super fast. No, play it again. Yeah. And I'm trying to reason with him. But, you know, what we discovered, too, is that the temporal lobes, which are responsible for reasoning, can't be accessed when you're in that fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
So it didn't work.
It didn't work. So how old was he when you adopted him?
He was only 6 months when we got him.
All right. So over this time here, how did you not necessarily cope, but address these issues? I mean, you said that he's getting better. He's no longer hurting you. He's no longer destroying property, and achieving things that you never thought possible. But how did you get to that point?
Oh, it was a long journey. We've tried everything. Let me say, I begged the pediatrician for like the first 3 years. I kept saying he's so agitated all the time. He's irritable. He's cranky. There's something wrong. We thought maybe it was sleep. We did a sleep study and found out he did have sleep apnea. So we took out his tonsils and his adenoids and thinking that would be the answer. It wasn't. And then, kept saying, I need some help. And she kept saying, it's just terrible twos. Sometimes they drag into the 3s, sometimes the 4s. And I'm like, I already have a kid that doesn't have these issues, who's been through the terrible twos. I've seen it before. It's not this terrible.
It's not this bad. So I mean, did you talk about like ADHD medicine or anything like that? I guess
that was the first thing. About 3.5, they looked at him for about 5 minutes. She sent me to a specialist finally, And they said, oh, clearly he has ADD. Here's some medicine. Finding out later, after the fact, that if your child has a mood disorder, ADD medicine makes things worse. So he kept getting worse. And of course, the rule with these psychotropic medicines is that you have to let them build up in your system for about 4 to 6 weeks before you can see if they're working. So when things go downhill, we have to hang in there for 4 to 6 weeks. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And so then we'd have to wean him off one and start him on another. And, we've had almost every diagnosis out there in the alphabet. We've had like ADHD and ASD, which is autism spectrum. We've had ODD, bipolar, SPD, sensory processing disorder.
All alphabet soup there.
Yeah. And so every time they were like, well, maybe it's this. So this requires a different medicine. And, we assume they're doctors. They know what they're talking about. I mean, I didn't want to medicate my kid, but I also trusted the professionals who told me this is what I needed to do. So,
So what are you doing? I mean, you're telling this story out now. I mean, this is a story that you've told time and time again. You're launching this new university, Trauma Drama University. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing here with this, with what you're launching here in August.
Yes, so I am launching a new program. It's a 1-year program called Trauma Drama University. It's going to include a bunch of things, but it's really going to be just a place for support, resources, and education on this topic of trauma disorders, specifically RAD, Reactive Attachment Disorder. But there are kids that have different degrees of attachment disorders and trauma that I think I could still help those parents. But basically, there's 4 online courses that are going to talk about exactly what happens to the brain during trauma, getting yourself in the right mindset to parent a child like this, the symptoms of PTSD and parents of these kids. And the last one is going to be on treatments and therapies for these kids. So that's the 4-part course. But then there's also going to be monthly Zoom sessions with industry experts. I'm doing one in August on how to write a 504 or an IEP if your child needs help in school. We're going to get a guy in to talk about calm parenting techniques. I have, a bunch of experts coming, and it's going to be really exciting. So that's part of the package. And then I'm also doing kind of an R&R day where we're going to either do a self-care activity, a book discussion, or a movie watch party. So,
because I mean, just as a normal parent, and I hate to use the word normal, but as a typical parent, that's hard. And you need breaks, and you need rest, and you need babysitters to take the kids away. How I imagine this is exponentially more difficult because you can't just let the babysitter take the kid. You can't just let grandma and grandpa take, because that could make matters worse. It seems it's more 24 hours, 7 days a week.
It is, exactly. And you need a support system. And the problem is that a lot of the support system, like family and friends, are giving you parenting advice that isn't going to work for your kid. And they're not believing that you're doing the things that they're telling you because your kid isn't reacting the same way their kid is when they use that technique. So when you have a non-neurotypical kid, everything in those parenting books is basically out the window. It's a totally different thing. We're working on healing their relationships and healing their brain before we can get into like parent discipline stuff. We have to discipline very differently so we don't affect their self-esteem and their growth. So
how rare is this attachment disorder? I mean, what statistics do we have out there?
I don't have any. I have not come across any statistics, but it's a pretty rare. I would say maybe like 1% I've heard. Wow. However, in adopted or foster kids, it is a much higher incidence. And the reason being because there's a reason those kids don't stay with their original families. So a lot of times there is abuse and neglect, and therefore we have to try to figure out how to heal that trauma.
Wow. So you testified on mental illness and mental health laws before Congress. One, how do you get invited to Congress? And two, what was that like?
Well,
and then three, we'll get into what you testified about.
Yeah, so it was actually our state Congress, so it wasn't the ones you see on CNN or Fox News or whatever you watch. But state Congress. I'm friends with some other girls who are rad parents. I'm very close with some of the girls that started the Rad Advocates, which is another rad program to help parents, in schools and in court cases and things like that. They'll advocate for the parents that way. So they're friends of mine. They somehow were talking to one of these Congress people and found out that it was a mental health bill. And it was a bill to try to make it easier to access residential treatment facilities if you have a child like this. Right now, before this law passed, it did pass, by the way. Before it passed, it was you either had to relinquish your child to get them into that program, or you had to have CPS open a case against you, which means maybe you're abusing or neglecting your child.
Yeah. CPS meaning Child Protective Services.
Right. And if you're not if you're in a position where you have a certificate to work with children, like if you're a teacher or a psychologist, you could lose your license if you have that case opened against you. Yeah. So you don't want to do that, but you also don't want to relinquish your child. So this way, it said if they had a diagnosis of a trauma disorder, we would be able to just apply and get in and not have to go through the other steps.
Yeah. Now, you've done a TED Talk. And now, where was that? That was a local the TEDx that you were doing. So where was that at? And have you done more than one, or talk a little bit about that?
My first TED Talk was March 7th of 2020. Okay. And like the week after that, the entire world closed down because of COVID. So I was about to start this speaking career, and then I took a year and a half off due to COVID because nobody was hiring speakers, and it gave me time though to think about how I wanted to help parents with this. Like I said, I have my book, I have my TED Talk. I want to help people. I want to raise awareness about RAD, but how do I do that? And so I came up with Trauma Drama University, and I'm really excited to launch it. It's going to launch July 26th. I don't know when this is going to air. So
this will be out. It'll be out on the one. I don't know offhand. It'll be my next availability. So it'll be on the 26th. So the day this comes out, this is when it launches. I just didn't have a calendar in my head. So, talk a little bit about you talked a little bit about what it is, but because how do people access this? What is, I assume there's an associated cost with this. Can you talk some about
my university?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So it's going to be a full year program, and there's also going to be a private discussion board. I know there's several on Facebook that are supposedly private, but Facebook is too easy to bust into. So we've had some people on these Facebook groups that have people have taken screenshots of their information, their private information, and like sent it to court and things like that. It's just been really horrible. So I'll have a private one so you can actually discuss things, and it won't go outside of that group.
There's a Discord. I am part of a private, or not a private group, but it's a private channel on Discord, which is another type of social media. So that might be something for you too, just to get that experience there. Yeah. Because I know that you have to be invited to a lot of those places. So how many people do you think you can help? I mean, if this is a rare, if RAD is rare, but there's also other mental health issues that you can address, right?
Oh yeah, and it's when I say rare and I say like maybe 1 in 100, that's really not that rare, you know.
Okay.
There are plenty of parents struggling. I see them all on Facebook and in, you know, my adoption camps, and, you know, I'm friends with some foster parents and they're struggling as well. So I mean, it's not that uncommon for people to have struggles like this.
Yeah.
So if you're interested, it's traumadramauniversity.com.
And I'll link it in the show notes too.
Okay, great. So. Yeah, and I also made a free poster for anybody who wants it. You don't even have to be part of the group. You can just go to my website and click on the free poster and download it. When I was going through this, a big part of my success was changing my mindset for my child. So I made this vision board. I found all these things on trauma and what it does to the brain, and I made this vision board. And it was kind of cut and paste and, you know, cute.
Yeah.
But I decided to make a professional version of this. That's professionally designed and looks nice. And basically it just tells you what happens to the brain during trauma. And I kept it by my bed. I looked at it every morning and every night. And it really helped me remember that he's trying to heal. He's not doing this on purpose, because it's real easy to get into that frame of mind where, oh my God, I hate my kid. My kid is such a pain in the ass. Yeah. And I don't want people to go that direction too often, because we got to keep it positive, and we've got to build that connection. And we can't build a connection if we decide to give up on them.
Yeah. But I mean, I could see that we're talking about mental health for the child, but this can really impact mental health for the parents too. Oh, and so, absolutely. I mean, and that's why you had emphasized earlier about with the university of how to help give mental health breaks and creating that community.
Right.
What's a simple way to get a mental health break for parents who have a child with this attachment disorder?
I think you really have to have a parenting partner. Mm-hmm. And if you're a single mom or a single dad, you know, you need to find another parent to like buddy up with and be their support, because it takes a community. And that's something that's kind of we're kind of losing in this world these days. We used to have like everybody in your family lived like on the same block, and we all knew your aunts and uncles and cousins and whatever. You know, my aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, they're in like 13 different states. So it's hard to build that family community, you know. And then before that, people were in tribes, and they always had, you know, this group of people. And there's just not enough community anymore. So we need to find ways to build community and to get another, you know, adult caregiver that can step in every once in a while.
Building community, building it physically, because I mean, there's a lot of virtual communities out there.
Right.
But I mean, I could talk to somebody in Australia, but that's not going to help me out if I need somebody down the street or next door.
Yeah, you need both. I mean, I think the online support community is great, but you also need somebody nearby that can give physical break.
Yeah. So how's your son doing now? Talk a little bit about what steps he still needs to do to, I mean, is this ever curable? I mean, it seems like okay.
Yes.
So talk about how he's doing now, and how long of a process is this to go from where he was at 6 months old to being, I guess, quote unquote, cured?
I wouldn't say cured, but better.
Healed, yes.
More healed than he was before. So when he was about 12, that was when hormones start kicking in and things get really, really bad. And that's when we got introduced to the juvenile justice system and, you know, had to find ourselves a new school because we weren't invited back to the old school and things like that. So that's when it starts really feeling out of control. And at that time, you know, when we were sent to the Juvenile Assessment Center, I stumbled upon the name of this therapist who was a world-renowned rad therapist, and he happens to live about half an hour from me. So we called him. It was as if he had been in our house. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly what we were dealing with, and he said, "Yes, I can help you." And so we went to a family support or family intensive therapy where it was 2 weeks, like 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. It was really intense. There were 4 therapists. Sometimes my kids were doing activities and my husband and I were doing different activities. And sometimes we were all together and sometimes it was just one-on-one. So over that time period, they did some amazing things to help him start healing. And that was like part 1. Part 2 was we found a therapeutic school for him that was really small class sizes. Like for gym, they did yoga and they did meditation every day. And so they learned a lot of tools to calm themselves in that school. They even had a therapy dog. It was a great place for him. So he did that for middle school. And then I like to say, too, at home, we were using the same techniques they were at school. They actually had a class for us. And so everybody was on the same page. And that's when he really started to heal. So you know, he did great up until COVID. So during COVID, he went back into a depression. But he hasn't, you know, trashed the house or anything. Like, I'm not afraid of him anymore. I used to be literally afraid of what he was going to do to me. And I don't feel that way at all anymore. Now he gives me hugs, which is huge. So,
So what have you learned through this whole experience? I mean, because I mean, it seems like, I mean, I don't want to say, do you regret adopting him? Because I don't think any parent would regret the decision. But what have you learned? And do you have advice for somebody who is adopting and is fearful of something like this?
Well, I would say as long as you're educated about it and know what to look for, that's going to make a huge difference. We had no post-adoption services after we adopted him. They're like, oh, congratulations, it's just like you gave birth to him. And the truth is it's not. So that was, where was I going with that?
Oh, no, just lessons learned. What advice would you give? What have you learned personally?
Yeah. So I have learned that it's a multifaceted approach. We can't just send them to therapy and not be a part of it because it's a whole family that needs to heal together. I also found out that, you know, it's just as important to have therapy as school and home all on the same page if we can. And to include some other things too, like exercise is really good for kids that have these issues to get some of their, you know, energy out. I found music is really therapeutic for my son. I know equine therapy helps for some of these kids, but that can't be the only thing. We have to hit it from multiple angles. And I think had I known that earlier, I could have shortened our process. That's what I'm hoping to do for other parents is give them like, who do they talk to about neurofeedback and what does neurofeedback do? And who would they talk to about equine therapy and what does that do? And who is that going to help? So
can you talk a little bit about why you decided to adopt?
You know, we went the traditional route for about 4 years, decided that I came to a conclusion that we were meant to adopt. And so I don't regret what I went through with my kids. I wish I had known, like, I wish I could go back and reparent them both, knowing what I know now.
Oh, of course.
I can't. And I tell them that all the time. I'm like, you guys, I could have done so much better if I'd known all this stuff, you know, 13 years ago. But I didn't. And I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. But I think just educating yourself on what this is and being able to educate your support system too. We need to be able to talk about it. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist, you know, and, you know, stay home all the time so he's not going to have a meltdown in public.
It seems like this would really strengthen your intestinal fortitude to go through an experience like that. Or do you feel like you're stronger? I mean, there's that old saying that says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yes. Well, for a while, it was killing me. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I still have really bad anxiety and, you know, triggers every now and then. But I do think in the long run, my heart grew 3 sizes, like the Grinch, you know, and I'm just much more empathetic with other people. And I think it's made me a better person. And now I just want to help other people.
How have you changed over this? I mean, you say you're more empathetic, and are you more giving, or what are some of the things that changed
Well,
about
I'm
you?
a lot less judgmental. The people who are the parenting experts are usually the people who don't have kids. Or they got really easy kids and they just think the rest of us are doing it wrong. So
Yes.
so yeah, I've learned to be a lot less judgmental. I now carry Starbucks cards, and if I see a mom who's like struggling with a horrible, kid in the public, I'll
Yeah.
go over and give my support and say, my son was just like this. I'm sorry you're having a bad day. Go have a cup of coffee on me, and just trying to
That's
brighten up
awesome.
the day.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I kind of want to do that, but that would get kind of expensive. I see a lot of parents having bad days.
Yeah, I don't see it that often, so sometimes I forget, but but
Yeah.
I usually try to go over and at least give them support and say, "Oh my God, I'm sorry you're having a bad day.
And
Is there
that would
anything I can do?"
that would make their day. I mean, that would make my day.
Yeah. Instead, I had an issue at Target one year where I was trying to pull my screaming child out of the store because he wanted something and whatever. I left the whole cart and everything, and I was heading to the door, and some lady actually said to me, "You should be ashamed of yourself. She said, I raised 6 children and none of them ever acted this way. You should be embarrassed." And I just cried all the way to the car. I'm like, I know, I'm already embarrassed. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, that's no way to treat other humans. That's horrible.
Yeah, that is. I that's as they call it, that's a Karen.
Yes.
that
Although my
was a
mom's
Karen
name is
before they were
Karen.
called Karens.
My mom's name is Karen, and she's a
Oh,
lovely person.
I have a cousin named Karen who's also a lovely person. Um, Anything else you'd like to say or mention or talk about or address that you want to make sure to emphasize?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but go to traumadramauniversity.com and check it out. We're gonna go live on the 26th, so by the time you guys are hearing this, there will be a website up and running, I hope.
Knock on wood, cross fingers, and
Yes.
dot your I's and cross your T's. All right. Well, Gina Heumann, thank you very much for being on my podcast. This was a pleasure. And maybe after this is up and running, we'll check in with you to see how everything's going.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me.